been to one of these before, a little bit of housekeeping. Firstly, the meeting is being recorded. Secondly, if you would like your questions answered this evening, please pop them in the chat. There is a message in there from LinkFairy already, so you should be able to see it. If you're on a desktop, the chat should be below you here. I'm quite happy to take any questions on pretty much anything. If I'm unable to answer it because it's outside of my area of expertise, I will basically direct you to somewhere else effectively. For those of you who've not been to one of these before, my name is Jo Southall. I am an independent occupational therapist, and I specialise in supporting people with complex long-term conditions to effectively self-manage as much as possible. So a lot of what I do is around coping strategies. Sometimes it's equipment recommendations. Sometimes it's just having a little rant and seeing what we can do to make a situation easier. So anything kind of pacing, joint protection, aids and adaptation, splints and braces, all that kind of stuff. Chuck me your questions and we'll see what we can do. Do we have any pre-asked questions this time? Let me just double check. I don't think we do we?
Nope.
Nope, all good. Thank you, LinkFairy. Before we kick off in any way with actual questions, please feel free to start asking them though. I've been asked to remind you all that the HMSA has an awareness weekend coming up soon. Yours truly will be attending with the wonderful Kim Claydon. And that is on the 20, I want to say, oh my gosh, brain. It's coming up soon. LinkFairy, I'm sure will pop a link in the chat. The aim of this is, oh, thank you very much. The aim of the weekend is basically to get everybody as educated as possible. So there will be some basic beginner stuff for those of you who are maybe new to a diagnosis or who would like to send along family members to learn the basics. And then there'll be some slightly more kind of comprehensive-y stuff for those of you that are old hands at this and know all there is to know, but would quite like a refresher because brain fog. Yeah. I think that's everything for now, but I will have a look in the chat and start you off with some questions. Since we don't have any questions just yet, what I will do is ramble until some questions appear. And unsurprisingly, the topic I'm going to pick is coping with the heat. So I am currently doing my postgraduate masters, and one of the modules I was looking at is sustainability in healthcare. And the issue I chose to focus on was the fact that heat waves are pretty bad for a heck of a lot of people. And a lot of the prep work in terms of making, sustainable choices for heat waves basically involves cutting costs once you've already been admitted to hospital, which is great, but I would much rather not be admitted to hospital. So I have done a little masterclass thingy, which I have created. With the aim of basically teaching strategies to manage heat wavy type situations. So there are a couple of things, personal cooling strategies I'm going to recommend from that masterclass that I've been doing for a couple of years and more recently have done formally in the masterclass. So the first one is evaporation cooling. So evaporation cooling is basically the same process that sweating works by. So the way sweating cools you down is that moisture on your skin evaporates because of increased temperature and usually increased airflow. As that evaporates, basically the transition from that being a liquid on your skin to basically a gas, uses heat from your body to create that transition. So effectively it has a cooling effect. Now, the difficulty with relying on sweat for this is firstly, it feels a bit gross sometimes. And secondly, for those of us with POTS, we work really hard to get all those electrolytes in and all those fluids in. And if we're just sweating them all straight back out again, it creates some problems. So evaporation cooling can be basically kind of cheated by putting like water on our skin. So like little spray bottles, like the kind you use for your hair, or the kind you mist houseplants with, anything like that works really, really well. So just misting yourself with water and then allowing that to evaporate is a really great way to keep all of your electrolytes, but also to cool yourself down. The slight issue with this is that not all situations are appropriate for wet t-shirt party chic in terms of like style choices. So for those of you with severe heat intolerance, or for those of you who work in uniform, or maybe in an environment where it's not suitable for you to be spraying yourself with water bottles, having some kind of alternative is good. So there's something called phase change cooling material. So PCM, phase change cooling material, is probably the most expensive option I recommend. However, it is one of those one-off purchase dealies. There isn't really a running cost with it. So what you basically get is a little vest. They are completely lacking in style, but if you're handy with a sewing machine or know where to commission a seamstress, you can get yourself something slightly nicer made. You basically take cool packs that you put in the fridge and then you put them in your vest to wear. And they're not ice packs, they are cool rather than cold. So your body isn't constantly fighting that to try and warm you back up again. So they stay at about 14 to 16 degrees for about 2 to 3 hours. And then you can take them out of your vest, pop them back in the fridge or in ice water or in the freezer, and they will set solid again. So what I would recommend for people who are considering phase change cooling would be to get 2 sets of packs and at least 1 vest. So you can wear 1 set of packs while they chill and then swap them over. So you can basically wear them back to back the whole time. If you're going out and about for the day, you can basically take one of those like chiller lunch boxes, kids lunch packs with the cooling material on the inside, pop a spare set of packs in that and take them with you. So it, is something that works quite well. It's not cheap. You're looking at a couple of £100 as a setup. However, I've had my cooling packs for well over a decade now, and they have absolutely no signs of wear and tear. So it is the sort of thing that when you look at per wear cost is slightly more justifiable. So just something to consider for those of you who are really horrendously heat intolerant. Okay, I can see we've got questions racking up, so I'm going to dive in and have a little look at these. I have MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, and I'm really struggling with the NHS. I'm with the pain clinic and they just tell me to pace. I keep mentioning my pain. I don't have flexible joints, but I do have my neck and hips, pelvic area keeps like dislocating. I've been experiencing it for 2 years, but I'm getting no answers. Could this be EDS? It hurts to walk on bad days. My neck feels so hard to turn and feels like lots of pressure bubbles are popping if I move my neck. It's horrid. Okay. There's a few things to unpack there. So the first one, for those of you that aren't aware, mast cell activation syndrome is one of those conditions. You often get it in kind of a triad. So quite often you'll get MCAS, some kind of autonomic dysfunction, and some kind of hypermobility disorder. Not necessarily always POTS and EDS, but that seems to be the most common combination. MCAS typically presents with things like random allergic reactions, food intolerances, oral allergy syndrome, like skin rashes, persistent cough, sometimes things like anaphylaxis, coming out in like rashes and hives, that kind of thing. The NHS does not have a particularly fantastic track record for managing MCAS, so I'm not especially shocked that you're not having the best time accessing appropriate care for that. So pain clinic are kind of on the right track in that pacing is essential. I don't necessarily think the pain clinic have given you the best advice, because just saying pace is not helpful. What you need is advice on how to pace yourself. I have talked quite a lot about this in the past, and I do offer a pacing masterclass myself, but there is some information on my website about pacing that might be slightly more useful. LinkFairy, if you can whiz me some of that up, that would be fabulous. So pacing is a good thing. However, pacing is kind of a foundation strategy. You are supposed to pace all of the time. Ideally, I'd like everyone to pace. I would like 10-year-olds to be taught pacing techniques so that they're immune to workplace burnout. I really want it to be like a foundation thing. What you're then supposed to do on top of that is go, okay, which symptoms have you got that aren't currently being fixed by taking little rest breaks? Okay. So in your case, we're then looking at pelvic pain. We're looking at kind of clunky, crunchy, bubbly, poppy sensations, all that kind of stuff. Could it be hypermobility related? In theory, yes. As an OT, I can't diagnose, even if I could physically see you, which I can't. So I'm kind of limited on how much I can kind of say there, really. Regardless of the cause, it does still need looking at. So what I would suggest, if you don't have a physiotherapist already, is to get yourself a physiotherapy referral. So Pain Clinic might have a pain physio, and they may also be able to refer you. So rather than going like GP and physio, they might be able to send you sideways straight to physio. Physio would then be able to have like a hands-on kind of diagnostic-y, touchy-feely, conversation-y kind of assessment. My hope would be that they would either be able to go, oh, yes, it's this, or they would then be able to go, we don't know, we're going to give you an X-ray or an MRI or a CT or an ultrasound or something. If you're having this issue kind of persistently and pacing is not fixing it, obviously taking more pacing is not going to be enough. So I would strongly suggest asking for further help. If they don't agree to refer you anywhere, please memorize the following phrase. Please document that you've refused my request for treatment. Or please document that you've refused my request for a referral, or whatever you're asking for. That phrase tends to be one of those things that makes fence sitters decide in favor of referral or treatment. If you've got somebody who's adamantly against you getting anything, they probably won't do anything in response to that. But if you've got somebody who's dithering over whether or not to help, usually that's enough to tip them in favor of doing something. We shouldn't have to play these games, but that is the way it goes in the healthcare system. If you have an acute episode where you have had something that doesn't feel like it's sitting right, like you feel like you've dislocated something, often for a lot of us, what will happen is that something will slip out and then slip back in again. And you'll go, oh, I dislocated my whatever. And you go to A&E and they give you an X-ray and go, oh, well, it's fine. So obviously you imagine the entire scenario. It is a common problem for hypermobile people to have imaging done and for that to show nothing. That doesn't mean there's nothing wrong. It just means that you haven't got any of the things wrong with you that you can pick up with an X-ray. So there are no broken bones, there are no fractures, there are no, bone tumors, there's no kind of wear and tear. That doesn't rule out soft tissue injury. It doesn't rule out historic damage. It doesn't rule out neuropathic pain. So although it can be disheartening to get these constant kind of everything's fine results, just keep pushing for treatment, basically. Regardless of whether you're diagnosed or not, you should be able to access treatment on the grounds that it's clinically necessary. That's all it should take. So hopefully somebody will be able to look into that a little bit. If you're needing a little bit of support to get your case heard, you could try writing a pain diary for 2 weeks, or like a symptom diary. And you can find examples of those online that you can just download in like Word document or PDF format, or you can make your own. But just document how often the pain is causing problems or the symptom is causing problems, how often you're getting injured, what you've tried in terms of management and whether or not it was effective. And then also have a think about, how many times a day or a week or a month is this actively causing you a problem? And if you're able to compile that data and then go in and go, look, I'm doing these things so far and it's made no difference, what's next? And then hopefully you'll get the what's next as a result of that. So yeah, best of luck. I hope that's helpful a little bit. Also, sometimes it's like I can't stand up because my legs are so stiff. Like I've been in the gym for an entire week and I haven't been in the gym in 3 years. No explanation for it. Drive me mad. NHS is being difficult. Any advice? Yeah, I think my previous advice still stands, is that you can self-refer to physiotherapy in most areas in the NHS. So get yourself a physiotherapist. Go in there with a documented series of incident reports, effectively, for whatever's happening. And just, if they're trying to give you a brush off, ask for a second opinion and go from there. I hope that's sort of helpful. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Okay, I don't have a diagnosis yet. Can you explain how hypermobility is diagnosed? My PCP recommended, that's how you pronounce that, rheumatology. Okay, so I will start with the basics in the hopes that this is useful. So hypermobility, the word hypermobility just means your joints are bendier than normal, right? That's all it means. Under the kind of umbrella spectrum of that, you have rhythmic gymnasts and ballerinas at one end, and then you have people that fall apart because of connective tissue disorder at the other end. So I'm assuming, given that you're here, that your hypermobility is causing problems. So you're probably going to be under the symptomatic hypermobility umbrella. So symptomatic hypermobility can be from, as an example, if you trained as a contortionist as a kid, you can then have problems with your joints as an adult. That might be one example. You can also have connective tissue disorders like Marfan or Stickler syndrome or Ehlers-Danlos syndromes, or, you know, benign joint hypermobility was the old diagnosis, but we now tend to use hypermobility spectrum disorder. So the diagnostic process varies somewhat depending on which of those things you're likely to have. So as an example, hypermobility spectrum disorder can be diagnosed by your GP. Like your primary care person can just look at you, go through the diagnostic criteria and go, yes, you're bendy, or no, you're not. The diagnostic criteria is pretty obvious. It's literally a tick box exercise and a series of stretches. And if you can do enough of those things, then you have hypermobility spectrum disorder. It gets a little bit more complicated if we're looking at some of the rarer genetic conditions. So then we'd start going on clinical diagnosis or clinical symptom presentation. So again, hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, probably diagnosable by your GP or your primary care person. Most of them aren't particularly comfortable doing that. So rheumatology is where a lot of us get sent. The difficulty with rheumatology is that a lot of rheumatology training and influence and expertise is focused on autoimmune conditions. So conditions where your body is attacking itself in various ways, which leads to symptoms. That's not what any of the hypermobility things are. So all of the rheumatology stuff that's so focused around how we treat autoimmune systems means that basically a load of rheumatologists are not particularly enamored with the hypermobile patients because we're not quite so medically interesting or fixable. So what tends to happen then is they go, oh, well, it's probably hypermobility or something. And you get a vague, half-assed kind of diagnosis. Or they just refuse the referral. Or if you are lucky, you end up with a hypermobility specialist who will go, yes, it's one of these, and they'll work out which condition it is. And if they think you've got one of the rare ones because of the symptoms you've had, as an example, things like collapsed lungs or aneurysms or really severe bruising or cardiac complications or digestive complications or abnormalities on X-ray, some of those really exciting, weird and wonderful symptoms, not wonderful, but you know what I mean. They might then get you referred on to medical genetics as an example for like gene typing. So they would then look at, actually, do you have any of these specific gene mutations that we've identified as being a cause of this one particular kind of thing? In the USA, as an example, it's really, really common to have genetic testing for Ehlers-Danlos syndromes. In the UK, almost none of my patients get genetic testing unless there is a really, really, really clear, strong family link or a clinical history suggestive of something rare. In which case, you do get genetic testing, but it's done through rheumatology. So it does kind of vary a little bit. With healthcare pretty much everywhere, what should happen is that regardless of whether or not you have a diagnosis, you should be able to get treatment for your symptoms. So even if you are undiagnosed, if you're saying my joints are causing me problems with my mobility, I've got injuries, I've got low muscle tone, that on its own should make you eligible for physiotherapy, as an example. Or if you're having difficulty with your daily living tasks, or you're struggling with hobbies, or your pain is interfering with whatever it is that you're doing in your life, you're eligible for occupational therapy, as an example. So it should be nice and simple in that you go to a healthcare professional and go, I have these symptoms and it's having this impact on my life. What do we do? I hope it works that way for you. But if it doesn't, basically just kind of follow the above advice. And could you please document that you're, refusing my referral or whatever. You are entitled to second opinions at every step of the process. And you are entitled to change healthcare professionals at various steps of the process. As human beings, we do not immediately make friends with everyone we meet. Sometimes you just have a very different existence style to various healthcare professionals. So yeah, just see how it goes. But in the meantime, don't be afraid to ask for treatment before you've got that diagnosis. So a lot of the time with diagnoses, you get the diagnosis, but that doesn't actually change anything. So there isn't like an automatic pathway with, you've got this diagnosis, here's your physiotherapist, here's your OT, here's your speech and language therapist, here's your mobility aid, here's your whatever. So even when you've got the diagnosis, like the treatment, the support that you get following that would be based on clinical need. So don't feel like you can't access these things whilst undiagnosed, because the waiting time is like important time. If you're waiting a long time for rheumatology, you could have been doing physio then. You could have been getting support on pain management. So feel free to pursue kind of multiple paths in the meantime, in the hopes that you would become an expert in self-management strategies. Keep yourself from deconditioning, get to grips with your symptoms, and then when you get your diagnosis, it's just kind of putting a nice neat little bow on top. I hope that makes some sense and is useful. Okay. Please could you offer any advice on how to best support and prevent subluxations when doing gym-based exercise? I've been doing medically supported circuit training via GP referral, and I will get 20 sessions supported and supervised access to the gym, but they're asking me to guide my own gym strategies as they're not EDS specialists. I also have POTS, MCAS, and ADHD, so I'm feeling a bit nervous looking at the machines. Okay. My first piece of advice is to take things really, really slowly. So there are very, very few things exercise-wise that I would blanket policy just say no for hypermobile people. I just wouldn't. There are plenty of ways that you can adapt a lot of activities. The hard examples of things where I just go, no, don't do it, would be rhythmic gymnastics, contortion, really high weight, free weights. Resistance is fine, but free weights are scary. And anything that involves you being up a mountain on your own. Other than those things, I don't have like a blanket, don't do this because you're bendy type list. However, if you as an individual have a long history of specific injuries or specific areas of weakness or specific areas where you struggle to build strength, factor those in to your gym routine. So if you know that your wrists are really, really weak, having something really heavy in your hands is not necessarily a good idea, as an example. Whereas doing work with resistance bands that doesn't go around your wrists might be a more effective way to build strength, but without straining those areas. Particularly if you are on the neurodivergent spectrum and you struggle with interoception, so your body awareness whilst exercising, I would strongly suggest taking little pacing breaks as often as possible. And even if it's just for a few seconds, take a little pacing break, stop, ask yourself, how am I feeling? Am I tired? Am I hungry? Have I done a little bit too much? Do I have pins and needles? Are my arms and legs attached? Do I need the loo? Am I feeling a little bit dizzy? Or, do I feel like I've worked really hard? Constantly question how you're feeling, and you are more likely to pick up on the first signs that you're overdoing it a little bit. Whereas if you don't take those breaks, the kind of endorphin rush, sort of hormones associated with exercise, almost work like pain relief, and then adrenaline kicks in, and then you don't really notice when you're injuring yourself. And then what happens is you get home from the gym going, way, what a successful session, it was great. And then the next day, it feels like you were hit by a bus. So taking those breaks to proactively check in with your body and to do things like get an ice pack or do some stretching or, top up your fluid levels, top up your electrolytes, that kind of thing, is really, really sensible. So being very body aware is a good thing when starting a new exercise routine. Now, body awareness, proprioception, is something a lot of us struggle with. Jess Eccles has some really amazing research into neurodivergence and hypermobility, which probably goes some way to explaining why most of us don't really know where our own bodies are half of the time. So compression clothing can be a really, really useful way to support that. So compression clothing gives you a little bit of kind of full body proprioceptive boost. So proprioception is your awareness of where your body is in relation to the rest of yourself, but also your environment. So somebody with good proprioception can walk through a doorway carrying a full mug of tea in each hand with no problems. Somebody with bad proprioception would do that, walk into the door frame, burn themselves, get the dressing gown sleeves caught on the door handles, and then trip over their own feet. I can probably guess which category most of you fall into. It's the same one I fall into. So that compression clothing can be a really good way to just give yourself a little bit of a boost in terms of body awareness, in the hopes that you won't injure yourself quite so much. There is a really nice kind of hybrid option there. So splints and braces can be really, really good. However, they do tend to limit your range of motion. And there is a risk of deconditioning in the sense that your body develops a dependency on using those splints and braces. Now, this doesn't happen immediately, and it tends to happen if you're using splints and braces 24/7 rather than just for the gym, as an example. But there are options for compression clothing that's custom made for your body, and these are available on the NHS. So there are 3 companies in the UK that currently offer this: Allard UK, DM Orthotics, and Jobskin, who I think go by something else in the trade circle now, but I can't remember what it was. But those 3 companies basically make custom-made compression garments, which are really, really good for giving you that proprioceptive boost, but also having specific targeted support built in for your areas of instability. They aren't cheap, but luckily we make the NHS pay more often than not. It can take a while to get the fit right, and they are quite warm for quite a lot of them. Like, it is an extra layer of compression clothing. However, on balance, it's a really, really good way to give you the support you need, but without restricting your range of motion. Allard UK have fairly recently come up with another option, which is the HIMO. So that's a less bespoke but slightly thinner version designed specifically for hypermobile people. I got my first set of HIMO leggings very recently, and my initial thoughts are very positive, but I will report back in a couple of sessions. One of the reasons I went for the HIMO rather than the other options are because it's thinner, which makes it cooler, but also because you can swim in it, meaning that for exercise perspective, it's a little bit more variable in terms of how many different activities you can do in it. But the compression garments generally are something that works really, really well for a lot of hypermobile people, and they're definitely something I would recommend. So I would suggest trying just off-the-shelf sports compression. If that works for you, you can then go to your GP and use that as evidence for the fact that the custom compression would be a really, really good thing for you to try. And then you can get that fitted by NHS Orthotics. So hopefully some of that is useful. Obviously, if you've got sessions going on now, it's not going to be particularly helpful in terms of immediate use. But what you could try would be kinesiology tape. So research basically proves that even really badly applied tape doesn't do any harm and still does some good. So you basically kind of can't mess it up in terms of applying it. The issue where some of us struggle, particularly the mast cell activation folks, is that like adhesives on your skin can be a problem. However, kinesiology tape would be a much cooler, less sweaty, quicker access solution in terms of giving you a little bit of support, and just giving you a boost of awareness in terms of what your body is actually up to while you're doing things. But for the most part, I would say give it all a go, slowly in very small sets with very light resistance, and then see how you feel before doing it again the same session. Report back in 2 weeks' time. What you may need to do is adjust the intensity down. A lot of us are actually a lot more deconditioned than we look. So a gym instructor or a physiotherapist might look at you and go, yeah, not bad. But actually, a lot of us kind of cheat, like we just stagger from position to position, not necessarily using the right muscle groups. So there can be areas of real muscle weakness that don't become apparent until you would start doing like a specific exercise, if that makes sense. So yeah, take it slow, try to be as body aware as possible, and good luck. Okay. Next question. Do you recommend any compression garment leggings for knee and ankle hypermobility joints to reduce pain with long walking? Yes, I do. Get lots of them. The only slight issue in this kind of weather is that because it's so warm, you can end up overheating. So your little spray bottle comes in handy again. Just mist your leggings down and let that evaporate off. But yes, I would definitely recommend compression garments. Long walking as well. The other thing would be actually, if you're going to be walking longer distances, really have a think about getting some podiatry assessment done. So there's a lot of wisdom in starting from your feet and working upwards in terms of a rehab perspective. But if you do have very kind of unstable feet and ankles, you're going to be wobbly from the ground up. And that can often present itself as knee pain when walking, or hip pain, or low back pain. So particularly if you're going to be doing long distance walking, or particularly if you're going to be doing off-road walking, podiatry, looking at insoles, looking at supportive shoes, looking at your gait analysis can be really useful. And I would definitely recommend referring yourself to get some of that done. But yes, compression is definitely a good thing. The other thing I would say, don't be afraid to use mobility aids. Mobility aids get a lot of bad press, and there is a perception that you shouldn't be using mobility aids unless you physically can't leave the house without them. But actually having something with you, not necessarily using it all the time, but if you get to a little bit of a rough terrain, or you're trying to carry something, or you are walking into the sun and you're a little bit less confident on your balance, pulling out a little fold-up stick for a few minutes there and then putting it away again, not a problem at all. There is absolutely nothing wrong with using mobility aids for very specific tasks and then ditching them later if you don't need them. So it might be worth just having a little think about that. Okay. Cutting with knives, cutting soft bread, cutting meat, slicing roast, slicing onions, all severely distort my joints and bends fingers and thumb and wrist backwards. I cannot override the muscles. I have super sharp knives, so less force is required, but still, what can I do? Should I have a carer to do slicing? Pre-sliced food, not an option, as eat fresh local produce that is unprocessed. Is there a torture device or exoskeleton to hold joints straight so I can use a knife? Yeah, so sharp knives would be my first recommendation, which you're already trying. If sharp knives don't work, upright ergonomic knives are a good thing to try. So what you get, let me just mime this with a pen, is the knife blade, and then rather than holding it like this, the handle goes upright. So it's a sawing motion rather than like a pushing down chopping motion. So the difficulty with chopping in a traditional knife grip is that a lot of the force goes through the smallest joints in your hand with the least muscle. And it's not an even distribution of pressure throughout your hand and wrist, whereas sawing actions evenly distribute force down, and you're using like basically the pressure comes on the side of your hand rather than your hyperextended fingertips. So upright knives are a good thing. You can get like whole sets of upright knives. It's upright ergonomic knives. Who sells them? Complete Care Shop and NRS Healthcare, I think, sell them. They normally make a set. So there's like a bread knife, like a paring knife, and then like a generic longish bladed chopping knife. So that kind of thing might be worth a go. If, however, you are emotionally attached to your wonderful sharp knives, I am certainly emotionally attached to my decent kitchen knives. You may find that adding stuff to you rather than changing the knives is the way to go. So ring splints would be one option. What have I done with my demo things? I don't know what I've done with my ring splints. Give me a second. Ooh. Anyone else do the thing where you tidy your office or you tidy your room and then immediately forget where you've put everything? There we go. Okay. So, excuse me. Ring splints, as an example. This kind of thing here. Basically block hyperextension when worn. So that's my normal kind of fingertip. And then with the ring splints on, I can put the same amount of pressure on, but not go backwards. These are also, not these exactly things, but similar things are available in silver. I generally don't recommend the plastic ones. And the main reason for that is that if you are hypermobile but strong, or hypermobile but you're doing something that requires a lot of force, you can bend the splint a little bit if they're made of thermoplastic. I have yet to meet anyone who's been able to bend a silver splint. They also, I don't know, they only come in beige, so not particularly inclusive in terms of tone, skin tone ranges. And the other issue is that when you drop them, I don't know how this works, but whatever surface you drop them on, they immediately become invisible. Whereas the silver ones tend to not only look nicer, but they also make a noise when they hit the floor. And because they're shiny, you can spot them more easily. So the silver ones would be my recommendation in terms of, you know, if you're going to go for ring splints, go for silver over plastic. Price-wise, there's not even an alarming amount in it because these are severely overpriced, and most people who make the silver ones are disabled artisans and are keen to keep things effective cost-wise. So yeah, ring splints would be my recommendation for that. What these allow you to do is to move your hand in all the ways that a hand is supposed to move. So if you're not able to do certain movements, it's because you shouldn't have been doing those movements to start with. Ring splints by, is it Zomil? I think it's pronounced. But she also does like a thumb version. And you can get thumb braces and things as well that are designed to just restrict how much backwards you've got in terms of motion. Compression gloves can also be quite useful, but aren't especially washable, like in terms of just like hand hygiene washing. So it's worth having a set for the kitchen and then a set for like the rest of your life. So you can just, when you've finished cooking with a pair, put them in the wash, but you've still got some to wear for everyday life. You can wear ring splints with compression clothing, which is good. With all of these like splints and compression gloves, you can just buy them yourself for the most part. However, if you're looking at thumb and wrist braces, I would actually recommend going via NHS Orthotics. And the reason for that is that some of them, they're quite difficult to fit in terms of measuring yourself. And also, the nice ones are really expensive. And they're much easier to access on the NHS. I do know of a few people who've managed to get silver ring splints covered on the NHS, but it was not a smooth or easy process. So hopefully some of that is useful. And see how that goes. The other thing, LinkFairy's already put this in the chat, but you can get cutting boards that have like pins to hold things in place. And they're really, really good because you can just stab your item onto it and then chop it one-handed, which is particularly useful if you manage to like wreck a shoulder and you're at a sling, but you still want to make food, as an example. So yeah, those kinds of things can be really useful. Okay. I have recently been diagnosed with hypermobile EDS. I used to exercise 6 days a week, and now I can only manage a max of 60-minute walk, and I can't stand still for more than 10 minutes without pain. I've started keeping an energy diary, and I'm using the spoon theory, which is good for pacing, and I've realized that sometimes I'm overdoing it and I suffer the next day. It's helping me to plan to know what I can do without feel worse. I love that. It's quite common actually for people to get a diagnosis and then have a real decline in function. And I think what tends to happen is that there's this kind of relief associated with getting a diagnosis, and you can stop forcing yourself through determination and cortisol to function above what you're actually able to do. So what tends to happen is undiagnosed people force themselves to keep going in not so healthy ways, and then you get your diagnosis and then you crash. And then you can gradually build yourself up in a more sustainable way. At least that's what it definitely felt like for me. And that's a kind of picture I've noticed with the patients that I work with as well. So yeah, energy diaries, things like spoon theory can be really interesting. It is a good way to start understanding your own body, but equally, you're not expected to work all of that out on your own. So, you know, exercise referrals are a great thing. Physiotherapy referrals can be really good. Go see an occupational therapist as an example, and we'll talk you through it. but yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to fine tuning at this point. So when you know some of the self-management stuff, if you're not quite getting the best results, speak to somebody, bounce it off as a sounding board and just start fine tuning what you're doing strategy wise and which things aren't currently being managed that you might need a little bit of extra support with. And then you can take those to your GP and go, look, I'm doing all of these things, but I'm still struggling in this specific area. Who can you send me to who will help? And hopefully that allows you to start building a really effective management strategy and a really supportive team. So yeah, best of luck. Well done. Thank you for sharing. Ooh. And just have a little scroll through. What form of EDS is it called where you're not really flexible? That isn't really a thing as such that I'm aware of. Some branches of hypermobility disorders tend to result in less obvious hypermobility. So all of them, you'll have hypermobility to some extent as characteristic, of the name. However, if you have, as an example, a really significant injury history, or you used to be a professional athlete and you wrecked your body doing that, the amount of scar tissue and tension you've built up can make it look like you're not hypermobile because you've lost your flexibility. So I used to be hypermobile and flexible. I've lost my flexibility when I stopped dancing, stopped doing gymnastics, and decided to get a load of injuries in a short period of time, and then hit 34. Do you know? So, my symptoms don't look the same as they used to, but I am still hypermobile. Some of the other conditions, as an example, you can have peripheral hypermobility spectrum disorder, where you would typically see hypermobility in hands, feet, wrists, ankles, and not particularly any other body parts. Can be a thing. And actually, a lot of people with vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome tend to have slightly more peripheral hypermobility. But the compromise on that would be much more severe internal organ dysfunction. And a lot more severe vascular complications as well. So it does vary a little bit. It isn't so much like a set subtype where you just get the non-flexible people. But yeah, I hope that makes some sense. Yeah. Okay. Name of those companies. Yeah, so compression garment companies are DM Orthotics, Jobskin, and Allard UK. Thank you, LinkFairy. Amy, I too love LinkFairy. I could not do this without. Lovely. Best exercises to strengthen hypermobile ankles. It depends very much on what aspect of ankle function you're looking at. Obviously, I'm not a physiotherapist, so exercises to strengthen things are not my specialist area. However, I am a practice educator for physiotherapy students, so I've picked up a thing or two from them. It very much depends what the issue is. So as an example, if you have a particular area of weakness, you're going to need a particularly targeted exercise for that area. So as an example, I've got fairly widespread instability in my feet and ankles. However, I also had a pre-existing injury where I rotated my ankle outwards at a very alarming angle at high speed with high impact. Now, it took me 4 years of physiotherapy as a teenager to get that back to the level where I was just hypermobile. And this was before my diagnosis. So we're not going to be able to miraculously make your ankles not bendy. But if you've got bendy ankles plus significant instability or weakness or whatever in a key area, building that key area up can be really useful. With all of this, it needs to be done in moderation, and it should be done with kind of podiatry involved in terms of foot function. people tend to go one of two ways, and some people will go both ways. I personally can either walk really well barefoot or in really structured, like formal, like Oxfords, like formal shoes, basically. Anything in between those causes a problem. So barefoot walking actually was a really big part of me rehabbing my ankles, and I managed to get from wearing like really structured ankle braces to being able to walk barefoot over the course of like 3 or 4 years. But generally speaking, it's a very individual process, and it will require a little bit of assessment and also looking at what you're doing with your life, your injury history, what other joints are involved. So if you've got a problem with the arches of your feet, you may be limited on what ankle exercises you can do, as an example. So your best bet is probably to see a physiotherapist or a podiatrist. And I've just been reminded by LinkFairy that podiatrists have diagnostic privileges. So bravo, go see one of them. But to actually like have a look at what your function is and to work out what specific area is the problem, basically. So I hope that's kind of helpful. Ring splints look cool. What about the bigger knuckle joint? So this one, I don't have any to hand because I don't own any, but there are splints that do support that area. They also come in silver. It's basically like kind of looks like a ring, and then it's got like a little metal wire triangle that goes round the knuckle, and then a matching one on the palm of the hand. And it basically kind of just, when you bend your hand, stops you from doing that position, and it kind of like forces it like that, if that's making any sense at all. But that is a thing that exists. If it doesn't exist, hand therapists can make you something that does the job, because they go through quite a lot of training in order to basically create splints for whatever situation you need. Compression gloves can also be really good for those areas, particularly kind of anything around the hand where you've got like a combination of issues going on at once. So hopefully that sort of answers your question. But yeah, feel free to drop me an email if you would like more information and stuff. Okay. Our local orthotics don't do hands. We have to go through physio department and COT, but the wait list is too long. When you're desperate for wrist or thumb support, I've bought direct online, but other than the company select, I've not found any good ones. Okay. If you are in a situation where you cannot access thumb and wrist supports, there are a couple of brands I would semi-recommend as an example. So if you're looking at thumb instability, it's the Riso Forte brace, and it kind of immobilizes these two joints. So if you've got any of the issues where your thumb just sort of detaches from your wrists, that's quite a good one. However, because it's so restrictive, it's not something you can wear 24/7. You will decondition. But it's really, really good for post-injury stabilization, where you basically have subluxed something, or you're doing a task where you think you're going to get an injury and you're wanting it to kind of prevent that. That can be quite a good one. There are two other companies I really like. One of them is Medi for braces, and one of them is Push Brace. Push Brace are slightly lighter weight, slightly thinner fabrics, but they're also slightly more expensive. But those are the ones that I would probably recommend the most. I can't really give you like a specific thing, but if anyone does want to drop me an email, if they'd like an appointment, I would be able to then give you slightly more advice, because I would have access to more information about you as an individual, if that makes sense. So hands are a bit of a weird thing. Generally speaking, hand therapy is the department that deals with hand things. I don't really know why we just decided to divvy the body up in these ways, but we have. So hand therapists start as occupational therapists and then specialize in just hands, basically, or like hand and upper arm surgery. So yeah, orthotics can do thumb braces and wrist braces, but they're less likely to do finger splints. So it's worth asking for like thumb stuff. I have had like thumb braces from orthotics. I've had wrist braces from orthotics. But yeah, there's a little bit of an overlap. There's not like a particularly clear distinction between hand therapy territory and like orthotics territory. So yeah, just see if you can get them to blur the lines a little bit there. But drop me an email if you've got like specific questions there. Who do we go to for ankle braces if lace-up Victorian boots are not enough to stop subluxations whilst walking? And eventually ankle just... Okay, yeah. Orthotics, NHS orthotics. So you can ask your GP for a referral to orthotics, and they will have a look at that for you. I would also strongly suggest seeing physiotherapy as well to try and build that strength whilst wearing the braces. Lace up very structured boots, like Victorian style boots, are probably a really good starting point. You could also try combining those with kinesiology tape and then putting tubey grip over the top. So you'd have kinesiology tape, tubey grip, then boot, as a way to maintain your ability to wear stylish boots whilst also getting a little bit of extra support. It will, I'm afraid, probably ruin your Victorian boot wearing days if you have to go for ankle braces, because they are not particularly slimline, even the ones that are advertised as slimline. But it may be that having that compromise allows you to wear, some things on good days, or wear a different combination on bad days, or pick and choose what you need depending on how attached your ankles are feeling. So yeah, hope that helps. But yes, orthotics is the way to go. How long have we got? What hack/adaptation do you think helps the most in the home? I'm slowly starting to realize how many things I do differently or have aids for. Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. What would if I could only have one thing, what would it be? In terms of physical aids, I'm just looking around my office and I've got like 50 things in here. That's really tough. One of the things I do really like, I don't know, I'm going to have to really think about what my favorite would be, but swivelly saddle stools on wheels, I really, really like. And the reason for that is that the saddle stool is quite comfortable for a lot of people, but it's very unobstructive compared to like perching stools. And it means that you can be height adjustable and you can still scoot around the kitchen if you're loading the dishwasher or doing any kind, cooking wise, that kind of thing. So yeah, I really like saddle stools as an option. I think they're brilliant. Yeah, that's a really good thing to try. I love your tinted glasses. Where do you get those? Thank you very much. So I have visual stress, visual processing disorder. And I have had orange tinted lenses for a lot of years. I started out with green, but I've had some form of tinted lens since I was 12. I see a high street optometrist who specializes in visual stress, and we go through something called colorimetry testing. There are other tinting options available. If you get lucky, having done a colorimetry testing, you may find that your specific color result matches closely enough with a generic tint already on the market that you can get that cheaper, which is what happened to me. So yeah, basically I would suggest speaking to an optometrist rather than an optician. A lot of the time, like the big kind of chain opticians aren't so great about this, but some of the smaller independent ones, you're more likely to find somebody with a specialist interest. So yeah, if you basically search for colorimetry or tinted lenses or anything like that, hopefully you'll find somebody local. There is extra information on my website. There's like a tinted lenses blog post where I've written about some of my experiences there with visual stress. So I'm hoping LinkFairy can whiz that up. Lovely. How long have we got? A few minutes. Let's try and get through those. My son is an amazing drummer, but he does have double jointed fingers. Do you think at age 24 he should be taking precautions now, even though he doesn't have any pain currently? Yes, effectively. I think my optometrist says I see too much detail, which makes me tired. Yeah, that's a visual stress thing. The other thing that's a visual stress indicator for a lot of people is, I will come back. Sorry, that was a proper divergent, oh, look, a squirrel kind of moment. I will come back to the drumming question shortly. If you're really, really fussy about your prescription, like if you have a new eye test and your prescription changes by such a small amount that your optician wouldn't normally bother giving you new glasses, but you need them, that also seems to be correlated with visual stress. So Yeah, basically visual stress, visual processing, fussy eye type situations. Definitely, I would recommend getting tested for tints to see if that makes a difference. Definitely. Drumming wise, yes, I would definitely have a think about something like ring splints, because they don't limit your ability to use your hand in the way that they should. So, you know, they're not kind of adding compression. They're not going to be slippy. It should, I would hope, help with that. What it might be worth doing is just videoing his hands in slow motion while he does some drumming, and then watch it back. And if you can see his hands going into alarmingly hypermobile positions when you watch it back in slow motion, then yes, I would strongly start thinking about some kind of protection for that. If when you watch it back in slow motion, actually his hand function is pretty rock solid, nothing goes backwards, there's minimal kind of visible instability, maybe don't bother. It might be okay. But yeah, the first time I videoed myself walking in slow motion and watched my ankles was a real education for me. So that is a useful thing to be able to do in terms of like just looking at what instability we may not even notice at the time, but it is there. So yeah, I would give that a go. That's so cool. I agree. Hand therapists are indeed very cool. Who can fit in? What about if you are prone to shoulder dislocation, however, never been diagnosed with hypermobility? Yeah, so you can be hypermobile in like a joint. Like it doesn't have to be a systemic thing for a lot of people. Equally, the shoulder joint, so the shoulder is a ball and socket joint, right? So basically this is the top of your arm here, and it's got like a little lumpy bit, and then there's like a little cup on the side of your body that it joins into. Ball and socket joints have to move in a lot of different directions. It's a really complicated joint, and there are a lot of different muscle groups kind of involved in holding it in place. If you've dislocated that once, there's a decent chance you've done some soft tissue damage. Because it's so complicated, it can basically just recur a lot. So even if you're not in any way hypermobile whatsoever, if you've had a shoulder dislocation, you are at risk for further shoulder dislocation. You just are. So physiotherapy, compression clothing, protective splinting and strapping, if you're doing an activity that you think is likely to result in dislocation, can be really sensible ways of just keeping you slightly more held together. So yeah, I hope that sort of helps. We'll see. Feel free to message if you've got further questions. And we are out of time, and I think I got everything done. Yes, amazing. So last little bits, thank you very much for coming. I hope this has been a useful session, and my randomly wandering off on topic rambling wasn't too distracting. Please do check out the upcoming events. So LinkFairy has just put a description in the chat. Some of them are like free to members and then a small fee for non-members, just to kind of fund the charity and keep us all going, basically. So yeah, have a little look and check out those events. I would also strongly suggest filling it in the feedback form for me, please. Thank you. The feedback is so useful. It's really, really valued in terms of us adjusting events to make them better for what you need them to be. We have changed events. We've put on extra events. We listen. We do things in response to that feedback. Positive feedback is also really useful if we're attempting to get funding for things, which we pretty much always are. So please do give us some feedback, even if it's just, I had a nice time, thanks. It's really useful. Thank you very much. I will be back in a month's time, and I hope you will survive the heat and will join me for the awareness weekend. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care. Bye.